Okay, guys, I'm really excited about this topic because I received direction to find it through prayer one day. Most of the time when I pray, I tell God if there is anything He wants me to do, that He burdened me so bad that it makes it almost impossible to not do that thing because it will feel like a burden until it is done. Then the burden will lift once I do it. But before I received the revelation from this topic, I prayed that God would reveal something to me to the point that after I found this new thing, it would make me feel so dumb that I hadn't seen it before in Scripture. And He did just that. In Ezekiel 22:30, it says, "So I sought for a man among them who would make a wall and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found no one." In any profession, after you become a subject matter expert and gain skills to perform tasks necessary to accomplish a mission or vision, you can retain that knowledge or skill for a long time. If you neglect them, they can deteriorate. After being in the Army for 10 years, I can pick up a certain weapon, such as a rifle, a grenade, or even a tomahawk or knife for close range combat and cause extreme havoc in an enemy's camp. If you take an intercessor and put prayer in their mouth, they can do the same thing at any range. Do you know how to wear the armor of God and wield the weapons? And if you do know how, do you actually do it? In the Army, we would train with our gear on because we need to know how to fight with it on. We would even train during the war, not during the battle, but we would train what's called hip pocket training. When we had some downtime, we could hone our skills and clean our weapons. Even Army Delta operators in the Special Forces and Navy SEALs train, and they are the best of the best, but they still train. They continue to train to remain proficient because proficiency precedes progress. So, we are called to be repairers of the breach, but we are not called to sit back and have our walls breached over and over again. Jesus says the gates of hell will not prevail, which means we are the ones causing the breach. Breach the gates. The kingdom of darkness tries to snuff out biblical progress through fear. It makes those who could be easily swayed lay down their armor and weapons because those easily swayed believe that the armor of God won't protect them in war and the weapons issued will not change the outcome of the battle in front of them. It renders them ineffective as long as they sit in passivity. We saw this in 2020 during the scamdemic, that many still follow as their religion, and many more are even falling away from their faith. But every time this happens, as we see in the Bible and throughout history, there remains a remnant, and that remnant ushers in a revival. And I'm so glad to be a part of that revival, reviving those who have fallen away so that we can be a part of an awakening to those who have never come to Christ. When this happens, the revived get to be a part of the awakening that happens in the lives that are asleep or woke. We're actually trying to wake the woke up, which is a great deception that causes confusion because of all the lies society feeds the flock of the world. But we are not part of that flock because we are set apart and we know the voice of the Good Shepherd. We follow the Good Shepherd, not the great deceiver or the accuser. We will not live in the promise of destruction and victimization that the world offers, but we will live in the promise of victory, not to be confused with comfort in an easy life. Since joining the military, I have been a student of tactics and stratagems and the evolution of both along with the evolution of weaponry. When planning for a battle, you have to take into consideration the weather, terrain, the movement and formations such as the phalanx. The phalanx was a formation that had the soldiers very close together so their shields would be touching or locked. The phalanx would make the shields form a wall, and it was called a shield wall or wall of shields. If there was an opening, there would be a gap to stand in. Common commands included stand in the gap, or if a gap formed, the command would be given close the door. So everyone that is a watchman on that wall is standing in a gap. They are standing in a doorway that makes every single one of us a doorkeeper. Doors or gates is where transactions happen. It's where authority is enforced or surrendered. But after studying the armor of God and comparing that to the Roman and Greek armor and the utilization of the phalanx, I was always bothered by something: the leaving out of the spear. So let's go over the armor very quickly so we can move on to our main focus. We have the helmet of salvation, and I'm going to stop when going through a few of these to discuss them briefly. Can you imagine a soldier walking around in their underwear and a helmet? It's crazy. It doesn't make sense. But how many Christians do we see like that? They get their salvation, and that's where it stops. You don't know how worthless they are on the battlefield. I didn't say they were worthless. I said worthless on the battlefield because they take selfies of themselves from the neck up. But I am not here to talk about that, so let's move on. The breastplate of righteousness. It protects all the vital organs. The shield of faith. The shield forms a wall for the use of the phalanx. Would you use something to protect yourself if you had no trust in it, if you had no faith in it? You don't hope it will work because hope is not a battle plan. But think about what I just said about the phalanx. The shield of the phalanx would form a wall. Let's go back and look at the scripture I pulled up at the beginning, Ezekiel 22:30. So I sought for a man among them who would make a wall and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found no one. The shield of the phalanx would form a wall, and every shield bearer is a doorkeeper. They stand in a gap. There are other scriptures about watchmen being on the wall and sounding the trumpet to warn people, and we usually envision a permanent, immovable, defensive structure, that kind of wall. But I want to give you a new perspective, since we as Christians are supposed to be on the offensive. Jesus told us to go, not to hide behind our walls. So let's also look at the armor from the perspective of a Roman or Greek soldier. So if an army who used the phalanx, whose shields formed a wall, wouldn't that make everyone standing behind those shields a watchman on that wall, a wall that moves forward? But the shield is an offensive weapon that pushes back the enemy as well. It's not just a defensive weapon. It was also used as an offensive weapon. Next is the belt of truth, held much of the armor together, and the sword was sheathed on it. So we have the sword of the Spirit, and the sword was used in close combat. And close combat consisted of running off the line and was considered an act of heroism and bravery. One of the key components in war during that time period was competition, and that was something used in the military, and the sword helped prove how skillful a soldier was. The only problem was many soldiers would watch and admire those who actually yielded to the training and power of the sword. The ones who yielded were the ones who stood out as heroes, because they weren't the ones standing on the sidelines watching. They were participants, not spectators. Is this starting to sound like anything like maybe today's modern church? Hiding behind stone walls, not going out and being a participant, but are just spectating. The shoes of the gospel of peace, and the shoes were something key. They were critical for a soldier in the phalanx, because when the enemy hit the shields, the soldiers would have spikes on their shoes to dig in, so they did not slide backwards into battle and lose territory. These shoes helped with traction and leverage to push. It's kind of like cleats today in like soccer or football or something like that. All the soldiers would yell, "Push," when it was time to push, and they would push with the shield. I've heard it said that the Roman Empire grew with every step forward from the soldier within the phalanx, because they were taking territory. So after the armor of God is mentioned, prayer is mentioned. And I've noticed a lot of churches leave that out of the list of armor. They normally look at prayer as something to do instead of something to carry, instead of a weapon. But I have to disagree with that. If you search the armor of God on the internet, many diagrams will pop up, and nobody knows what to do with prayer on those things, on those diagrams. So they leave it out. I've always considered prayer as a part of the armor and weaponry. In the phalanx, the first thing soldiers use is the spear. So why is the spear left out of the armor of God? Now, I'll ask that same question and I'll give the answer in a moment, but I felt God tell me to read the book entitled Soldiers and Ghosts. It's a book on the historical evolution of different civilizations and their methods of warfare. I've read it already and I didn't want to read it again. It's like 400 pages, but as I was going through the book again, I noticed that the spear is one of the main focuses. So I began to think about what else I know about the spear. So how is the spear used? Now, this isn't going to cover everything, but I do want to go over some of the main things on how the spear is used. It is used in battle and part of the most effective weapon in warfare of all time, and that is sound. Soldiers would beat their shields in unison with their spear and intimidate the enemy. Sound through yelling, stomping, and other methods have ended battles before they began since the beginning of time. It demoralizes the enemy. If the enemy came upon the phalanx, two other things could happen, and it is not limited to just these two, but I'm just using these two as an example. In the phalanx, when soldiers were waiting for the enemy to be pretty much on top of them, one, a spear thrust would be used to keep distance between the enemy and the front line, so the front line could not be broken. Sometimes to rescue fallen comrades in battle or a victim of the enemy. A hole would be made to bring in the rescued. But this usually only happened with the use of the spear to keep that distance between the enemy and the hole in the phalanx. A hole, a door, a gap. Remember Ezekiel 22:30. So I sought for a man among them who would make a wall and stand in the gap before me on behalf of the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found no one. So in order to rescue someone would have to stand in the gap in the hole that was formed on the wall of shields. We could call that a door or a gate, a gap. So that involves the thrusting of the spear, and that is step one. Now step two, to hit the enemy from a long distance, a spear could be thrown, and this took great skill and training. This was to hit the enemy from great distances. This could entail assisting fellow soldiers who were surrounded by the enemy or the line was about to be broken on another part of the field of battle. Now, when the battle is won, sometimes, and this may be a little graphic, but the spear was used to put the fallen enemy's heads or helmets on. The spear was used to proclaim victory. It was used as a memorial. The message was, may we not forget we are the victorious, and to those traveling and passing by, they would see it and not forget that we are capable of being obedient to the call. And another thing it would say is, may we show our gratitude to the one leading us. It's a reminder. It's a memorial. Now, certain parts of the armor were marked with unit insignia, whether it be hair on the helmet, the art engraved or painted on the shield, banners that were flown, or carvings and colors on the spears. These things were marked, and others recognized it and showed it respect. Even the enemy showed it respect to these unit colors or insignia, because many retreats occurred because the retreating army would recognize the specific units that were entering the battle by their markings, their insignia. And how would they recognize it? Because they were marked. We need to remember, as Christians, we are marked. So I need to paint this picture. The enemy makes it to the phalanx. They push, trying to take territory. The spiked shoes from those in the phalanx dig in. They may slide a little from the force, but then in unison, the phalanx pushes back with their shields. The soldiers lift their shields and thrust with the spear. They take a step forward and lock shields again. Again, the enemy hits the wall. When the movement halts, the command is given to push. Shields up, spear, thrust. They step forward and lock shields again, taking the territory one step at a time. The phalanx was crowded. It was never a single line of soldiers with shields, but a formation with a dozen rows of soldiers right on top of each other, pushing the front line from the back to take territory. In the phalanx, the first thing soldiers would use is the spear. So let me ask this question again. Why is the spear left out of the armor of God? It wasn't. The thing that I thought was left out was the very thing that many churches leave out when talking about the armor. Have you ever heard someone say all there is left to do is pray? It should be the first thing we do. The sound demoralizes the enemy. They must flee or deal with what comes next. We are supposed to press in prayer. The definition of press is a crowd or crowded condition, an action of pressing or pushing. Does that sound familiar? Sounds like the phalanx, the moving wall. Sounds like watchmen on that moving wall, hence pressure. Are we putting pressure on our foe? So press is a verb, to act upon through steady pushing or thrusting. Remember, that's the technique of a spear. Force exerted in contact. To squeeze, assail, harass, afflict, oppress, to exert influence on, to insist on, or request urgently. To follow through, to seek urgently, to contend, to force into military service, to take by authority. These are things that happen in prayer. The same things that happen in the phalanx are the same things that happen in prayer. Territory is taken by exerting influence, by contending through military service in the army of God, to seek urgently and follow through. In Joshua 8:17-18, it says, there was not a man left in Ai or Bethel who did not go out after Israel. So they left the city open and pursued Israel. Then the Lord said to Joshua, stretch out the spear that is in your hand toward Ai, and I will give it into your hand. And Joshua stretched out the spear that was in his hand toward the city. Now, this is the second time they fight Ai. The first time they were defeated because the spear of prayer was not used. They did not go to God the first time. They thought they could handle it in their own power. In Judges 5:8, it says they chose new gods. Then there was war in the gates. Not a shield or spear was seen among 40,000 in Israel. The new gods took the territory. Why? Because no one was a watchman on the wall. No one had a shield or spear. No one stood in the gap. In 1 Samuel 17:7, it says, now the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his iron spearhead weighed 600 shekels. And a shield bearer went before him. Now this was a big spear. Goliath carried a spear, but the spear of prayer was to the wrong God, and God delivered him into David's hand. In 2 Samuel 23:18 and 1 Chronicles 11:11, we see two stories of mighty men who lifted their spear against 300 and killed them. Now, guys, I'm not going to get all these names right, so just bear with me. 2 Samuel, it says, now Abishai, the brother of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, was chief of another 3. He lifted his spear against 300 men, killed them, and won a name among these 3. 1 Chronicles, it says, and this is the number of the mighty men who David had. Jashobeam, the son of a Hachmonite, chief of the captains. He had lifted up his spear against 300, killed by him at one time. We also see in 2 Samuel 23:20-22 and 1 Chronicles 11:22-24, we see Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada. And like I said, I don't know if I'm pronouncing all these names right. Let's just go with it. You know what I'm talking about. So in 2 Samuel, we see Benaiah was the son of Jehoiada, the son of a valiant man from Kabzeel, who had done many deeds. He had killed 2 lion-like heroes of Moab. He also had gone down and killed a lion in the midst of a pit on a snowy day, and he killed an Egyptian, a spectacular man. The Egyptian had a spear in his hand, so he went down to him with a staff, wrestled the spear out of the Egyptian's hand, and killed him with his own spear. These things Benaiah the son of Jehoiada did, and won a name among 3 mighty men. So the First Chronicles 1 is very similar to the first one, so we're just going to go into First Chronicles 12:8. Some Gadites joined David in the stronghold in the wilderness, mighty men of valor, men who trained for battle, who could handle shield and spear, whose faces were like the faces of lions and were as swift as gazelles on the mountain. Now these people could handle shield and spear. We need to press and learn how to handle these weapons. Remember, the shield is not just a defensive piece of armor. It is an offensive piece. In 2 Chronicles 25:5, it says, "Moreover, Amaziah gathered Judah together and set over them captains of thousands and captains of hundreds according to their fathers' houses throughout all Judah and Benjamin, and he numbered them from 20 years old and above, and found them to be 300,000 choice men, able to go to war, who could handle spear and shield." Are we choice men and women? Are we able to go to war? Are we able to handle spear and shield? Guys, we're almost done with the scriptures. There's so many good scriptures, but I'm only going to go over a few more, okay? Jeremiah 46:3-4. "Order the buckler and shield, and draw near to battle. Harness the horses and mount up, you horsemen. Stand forth with your helmets. Polish the spears. Put on the armor." John 19:33-36. "But when they came to Jesus and saw that he was already dead, they did not break his legs, but one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. And he who has seen has testified, and his testimony is true, and he knows that he is telling the truth, so that you may believe. For these things were done that the scripture should be fulfilled. Not one of his bones shall be broken." Now this prophecy was given earlier. So the spear of prayer here is used to fulfill prophecy. The spear was used at the very end of what was done on the cross for everyone. How many times have we heard a family member praying for another family member to encounter Jesus and give their life to him? I know that many of us are here because of that prayer. The spear was thrust into our lives and drove out the strongholds, and we were brought into the phalanx of the Lord's army because someone stood in the gap. I'm going to tie all this in just a second, but in my time in service, specifically on my 3rd deployment, I was involved in a suicide bomb attack in Afghanistan where over 70 people were killed. After the investigation, the intelligence officer asked me where I was standing during the attack. I showed him I was less than 25 feet away with nothing between me and the bomber. He told me the only way he could explain it was an act of God. I knew there were people back home praying in intercession because they were too far away to thrust prayer into my life, so they threw it. And you never throw your spear at a target unless you intend to hit it. There must be expectancy in prayer. Revelation 19:10, "And I fell at his feet to worship him. But he said to me, see that you do not do that. I am your fellow servant and of your brethren who have the testimony of Jesus. Worship God, for the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy." So the testimony of your salvation and everything else that Jesus has done for you is a testimony of Jesus. Also, this is the spirit of prophecy because it doesn't stop with you. Your testimony will be prophetic in someone else's life because it can lead someone else to the same life in Jesus, to the same freedom that you are testifying. You were a witness, and so you testify it. No matter what you are going through in life, remember, you don't have to live through it. You can pray through it. The spear of prayer runs through the enemy, but it must be carried with sound, praise, and worship to the God who fulfills his word. Let this be a testimony of what Jesus has done for us, what he is doing right now, and what he is going to do. The testimony of Christ grows with the spear of prayer. You are the answer to prayer many times, which makes you the tip of the spear that is thrust into the darkness of whatever the enemy is using to attack a person. Will we intercede as watchmen on the wall of shields, taking the territory that the enemy has taken? We come against the breach of the enemy and fill the gap with the shield of faith, using the spear of prayer to drop demonic activities. Toe the line. Be the line. Send a message to the enemy. Devil, send your cowardice hordes, but only if you don't want them back, because they will be cast down and cast out. Territory will be taken because we are not stuck on this earth with the devil. He is stuck on this earth with us as we deploy. In our Christian life, we must abandon passivity if we want to fulfill the great commission that Jesus gave us. But much of the church believes that we are stuck on this earth with Satan, and they have raised their white flag of defeat to him. But if we would wave our white flag to Jesus, it would become a white flag of victory. And then we would realize that we are not stuck on this earth with Satan, but he is stuck on this earth with us, the army of God. In my book, White Flag of Victory, I discuss my time in combat and the parallels between warfare in the military and the warfare in the Christian life. If you'd like to add this to your library, you can find it on Amazon and the link in the description below. If you haven't surrendered your life to Christ and are ready to come to God, I would like to lead you in a prayer in just a moment. But first, I want to be clear. Praying a sinner's prayer is not a ticket into heaven. These are not magic words. You must follow Christ and live for him. You cannot receive salvation by your own merits, but by what Jesus has already done. Ask to receive the Holy Spirit, to be filled and experience what God has for you. You will not live the same life or be able to keep Jesus to yourself if you become a Christ follower. 1 John 2:4 tells us that the one who says, I have come to know him and does not keep his commandments is a liar. Those commandments are to love God and to love others. If you love God, you will follow him, and if you truly love others, you will want others to experience God and give their lives to him as well. So if you are ready to pray, pray this. God, I ask for forgiveness. I believe Jesus died for me, and nothing I have done wrong is too great for the power of his blood that was shed for me. I am ready to forsake the world and live a changed life because I realize how much you love me. I love you, and am ready to live for you. If you made the decision to surrender your life to God and follow Jesus, I encourage you to spend time daily with him in prayer and reading his word and worshiping him for who he is. Much will be revealed to you in this time with him. Be a part of a community of believers to grow in the fullness of God and his word, and join a church that does the same. Get involved and stay accountable to each other. Also, please let me know that you made this decision by emailing me at charliemike.me@gmail.com or message me on Facebook at facebook.com/CharlieMikeInternational.